So glad to see everybody out this evening. Thank you for coming for the second of our town hall meetings on Justice in the Round with Arthur Harold Michael Harvey. I'm Cynthia Harvey, for those of you who don't know. I've been editing for him about 33 years now. Actually, we've been married 33 years next month. We're going to get started very soon, and just to briefly tell you, we're going to begin with our invocation shortly with Reverend Dr. Maturia Chase Williams, and then I'll tell you a little bit about the purpose, which is very brief, and then I'll introduce you to Justice in the Round, followed by the interview with Steve Miles and Harold Michael Harvey. And just to tell you a little bit about Steve Miles, some of you may remember her from when she was managing editor at Channel 11 News here. She was also State Representative Steve Miles. But you may not know that the reason you have dates on your things like your milk that you buy in the refrigerator is in part because of Steve Miles. Early in her career in Chicago, she was part of a group of journalists who did this investigative study, and as a result, the government now requires that supermarkets have dates on things like milk.
Thank you first and foremost for being here for this very, very important discussion. I would love to have seen this room full of people, and not just African Americans, but people of all cultures and ethnicities. Because race in America is a discussion that must be had. And I am so happy that my friend has penned a book to spark that discussion. And so I'm very, very happy to be here this evening, and thank you, Sin, again for the wonderful introduction. I did not know you knew about the milk situation. And I tell my grandchildren whenever they say, well, this milk is stale, and I said, it's good for another week. I know. Trust me. Justice in the Round. What we'd like to do this evening, and you heard a little bit from Sin, is I will ask a few questions to try to spark the discussion, and then open it up for questions from you. So put your thinking caps on and drill down way deep about those questions that you would like to ask this author this evening. Your legal thriller, paper puzzle. And Justice in the Round is, of course, more scholarly. It is very thoughtful. It is a work that is a series of essays on the American jury system. What was the inspiration for Justice in...
The inspiration for Justice in the Round was the Trayvon Martin jury verdict. When I saw the jury verdict, I was appalled, I was shocked. What I had done in covering that trial for AllVoices.com is the night that the jury was out and we thought the verdict would come in that night, I sat down and, as a journalist, as a reporter does, I wrote the story. And the only thing I needed to plug into the story would be the headline and the verdict. And so I had the story written. And I even posted on social media, what do you think the headline should read? And then, of course, people chimed in and they said guilty, 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 and a few people said not guilty. But then when the verdict came in, and it came in not guilty, I was shocked. I could not understand how 6 human beings could listen to that evidence and not understand that Trayvon essentially was baited into fighting his way home, and have given him the benefit of the doubt of having to protect himself from this bully, alleged neighborhood watch commander, captain. So I set out to try to figure out what was wrong, and so I delved into the jury. Once the jury, certain members of the jury began to speak about their motivations, clearly, they bought into the story as presented by the George Zimmerman side. They believed that because George was white, that his view of what happened is what happened. You know, how can you say when a mother says, "That's my child," screaming for his life, how can there be any doubt in anybody's mind that a mother doesn't know the sounds that their child makes? And if you can conclude otherwise, that just tells me that your decision was not based upon the evidence that was presented. So as a result of that, I started this search. Well, what's really wrong? Well, what's really wrong is that good people, I thought in the beginning, that good people needed to show up when they get those jury notices. They need to show up and appear on those in the juries. Because oftentimes, I don't practice now. It's been over a decade since I practiced. And when I did practice, I practiced throughout the state of Georgia. And I would go into northwest Georgia, northeast Georgia, or south Georgia. And oftentimes, the only black person in the courtroom is me and my client. All the jurors are white. And so what kind of justice at the end of the day do you think we ended up getting? You know, so those questions plagues the system. So we have to really get down to it. The system is what it is, but the system is also made up of human beings. And human beings bring their socialization into the courthouse when they come in to appear for jury duty. You know, and if you're not socialized to be sensitive to the interests of people who are different from you, or that way of life, then you can't make sound decisions. One of the things I used to ask my jurors to do, I would tell them that there's a thing called a legal fiction, which is evidence, and there's a thing called truth. And the term voir dire is a French term which means to speak the truth. So jurors take an oath after that questioning that they will allow their verdict to speak the truth. And so I try to get them to not pay so much attention on the legal fiction that I'm going to present, nor the legal fiction that the state is going to present, but try to find out the proof. Because essentially what you have is you have two neighbors who got in a dispute, and 12 people are sitting in a box trying to decide what happened. Well, under our system, those 12 people get to say, I had a right to stand my ground, or I didn't have a right to stand my ground. And so, apart from the rule of evidence, the truth has to speak. And if the truth speaks, then justice occurs. But that's not what happens. And so, what I wanted to do in Justice in the Round is to appeal to people to start thinking about these issues and their motivations for believing the way that they do, in hopes that maybe we can begin to find justice in spite of the technical flaws in the legal system.
You were very clear in the book, in Justice in the Round, that it was not necessarily the American jury system as such that was flawed, but the people. And that changing hearts is what's key, particularly when our jury system by the Founding Fathers was made for Europeans by Europeans. African Americans and others were not necessarily part of that equation. You talked to people, you did not believe that we should replace the jury system. You did not believe in the book, as you wrote, that the size or the selection process should be changed. What I heard you saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, and please speak to it, that the jury system itself is not the problem.
Yes, I think that is probably an accurate statement. I think the system, to get 12 people, tried and true, who will listen to the evidence and allow that verdict to speak the truth, is the way that we come to justice. But I think that the psychology of people and our socialization process prevents us oftentimes from arriving at the truth, because we base our decisions upon our own prejudices. And everyone has a bias towards something or somebody or some group. Everyone. Black people do, white people do, Chinese people do, Latino people do. You know, so it's just a part of the human makeup. And so if we realize that we are biased, then we also must realize that we do not have to remain biased, that we can actually change how we feel about different people who are different than ourselves. And that's what is needed. We have to actually be able to honestly look at people and situations and say, well, where is the truth in all this, apart from the fact that I don't like people who wear red hats. Okay? Or I don't like the way she or he parts her hair, so I don't like that person because he parts the hair on the left side, and I like people who part their hair on the right side. You know, so that's the problem. The problem is inherent in the people. So that's why, you know, Justice in the Brown is a call to arms to people to become a little bit more introspective of their own feelings and thoughts and biases and prejudices. And we can root those out and become better human beings. We'll get to justice.
And Thurgood Marshall said, and you quoted him in your book, that the legal system can, you know, it can change things, it can even sometimes break down barriers. But at what point and how do we get to a place? How do we get to a place where we begin to see each other as human beings? That's the tough question. That's the tough question.
You know, that is a tough question. And I'm not certain that I have, in fact, I'm sure I do not have the answer to that question. But that's why I wrote the book, to begin the dialogue, because together we can come to the answer. We can figure this thing out. You know, when I was in high school, I integrated the junior high school in my hometown. And I recall very vividly, often, more than once, the guys would say, and I'm in a classroom of all boys, all white boys, and they would say, well, Mr. So-and-so, the federal government may make me sit next to Harvey, but they can't make me love it, because you simply cannot legislate love. You know, only people can do that. Only people can change their behavior patterns. And that sort of loops back to the quote that Thurgood Marshall made. I mean, you can't legislate love. And those boys at age 14 and 15 years of age, that's what they said. And of course, you know, who knew that things would change to the extent that I would have an opportunity to talk about that, because they said it so boldly that they didn't care. I was the only Negro in the room. And you can't legislate love, and that's the problem. But I think that if we put our heads together, and see, the other problem with this race, with the issue of race, you have these discussions. Black people have these discussions. But what good does it do for us to sit in a room and talk about race if white people don't engage us in that conversation? What good does it do for me to change and to understand my biases and prejudices when my white brother thinks that the problem is me? And that for me to think otherwise is to suggest that I am being racist or playing the race card. So somehow we've got to get these two communities together and start the dialogue.
Please join me in giving a rousing round of applause to Mr. Harold Michael Harvey on Justice in the Round. It is an excellent book. If you have not gotten your copy, please do so. It is a very good read, It's thought-provoking.